Well, the hour has come. It's 1 o'clock, and we'd like to welcome you all to this session today. And so, best practices for supporting transgender college students. And we have Dr. Bonnie Meyer. And so, I'm going to do her bio real quick. And Dr. Meyer, I will say Dr. Myers is one of my great friends. I love her to pieces. And so, we work together at Northern Kentucky University. And I hope you enjoy this session and learn a lot, ask questions as you need, and she's an expert in her field. So Dr. Meyer is an educator by trade who pairs that with her passion and inclusion for inclusion. She pairs that with her passion of inclusion and equity. Excuse me. Until recently, she served for 8.5 years as the founding director of the Office of LGBTQ Programs and Services at Northern Kentucky University, where under the leadership NKU received national recognition for LGBTQ plus inclusion, a 5-star recognition under the Pride Index. Very exciting for that for the students and the faculty and staff that were there. Bonnie is passionate about doing her part to ensure that Northern Kentucky is a place where all LGBTQ plus people can thrive. She serves as the chair for the Northern Kentucky Pride Center, which organizes the NKU Pride Festivals, advocates for local fairness ordinance across Northern Kentucky. Bonnie worked with the city of Covington to pass the first conversion therapy ban for minors in Kentucky, and has kind of worked and consulted with the city across Northern Kentucky in passing fairness ordinance altogether. Bonnie is currently a visiting faculty member in the Department of Educational Leadership at Miami University in Oxford, Ohio. She earned her doctorate of philosophy in educational leadership, culture, and curriculum, master's in arts and teaching, and bachelor's of science in education from Miami University. She lives in Covington with her wife, Katie, who is a wonderful person as well, and their 2 dogs. And so at this time, we'll give Bonnie the floor, or Dr. Meyer.
I'm so happy to be with you all today to talk about how to best support trans students. I do want to say I am a cisgender person, and as I am a cisgender person, I cannot speak to the, can you all hear me okay? Okay. I can't speak to, the experiences of what it means to be a transgender, or what it feels like to be a transgender person or student. So what I will pull on in our 55 minutes that we have together, I've been an educator for 19 years. I have spent 10 years of that time working exclusively in Kentucky until very recently, when Miami, Ohio, my alma mater, pulled me back home. And 5 years in Ohio, serving on a statewide advocacy at Equality Ohio at that point, but have really focused my work on LGBTQA plus inclusion in Northern Kentucky, but throughout all of Kentucky. So I'll certainly pull on that experience. I am visiting faculty at Miami University, and I certainly approached my work at NKU as the founding director of the Office of LGBTQ plus programs and services from a curriculum perspective. I believe that, well, obviously curriculum is the totality of our experience with literally everything. So when I approach this work and think about what it is that we need to do in order to make an institution more inclusive for LGBTQ students, but especially for our trans students, I think about their interaction as they walk across campus. It's not only about the books that we put in their hands or the classes that they sit in. It's about the representation that they see. It's about how our institutions are actively and proactively creating spaces and representation for transgender people. So I will absolutely share all of the knowledge that I have on serving LGBTQA folks, but particularly trans students at an institution in Kentucky, and having been the founding director and sitting in this work when we really got started as a university, and to see us grow that program to, when I left, we had 25% of our student population at NKU was self-disclosing that they were part of the LGBTQA plus community, and more than 10% disclosing that they were part of the transgender community. So I'll talk a lot about that. I'm happy to answer any questions. I love to do these things in person so that we can actually, really engage. But these conversations are always best with discussion. So I have some slides that I'm going to share to walk us through the content. But at any point, please stop me and ask any questions that you have. I have quite a bit of content, and we'll probably just go over some of the basics and provide a lot of time for Q&A. So let me really quickly here share my screen. Okay. So we will talk just very briefly about what it means to be LGBTQA+. I want to make sure that we are all on the same page. I want to talk a bit about the legislative impact or impacts for Kentuckians, but also for Kentucky LGBTQA+ students. I'll share just a tiny bit for a moment about the experiences of LGBTQA+ high school students, so that we can have a greater understanding of what their experiences are when we get them, in here in higher ed. A little bit about Trans 101. We'll talk about gender identity and pronouns, but really I want to talk about some of the best practices that you can implement for supporting transgender students. And I am pulling these best practices from a couple of different places, one of which is this Campus Pride Index that Dr. Yates mentioned a moment ago. I have resources. Lexington has a plethora of resources for LGBTQA folks, so hopefully we can get you connected to some of those as well. So ideally, by the end of our 55 minutes together, you'll be able to better know and use appropriate terminology and definitions, how to better identify online and local resources, how to better participate in supportive conversations, and how to have a better understanding generally of how to be an advocate and ultimately an accomplice for our trans students. So I just want to begin by talking about Kentucky. Kentucky, in doing this work and serving LGBTQA+ students is not always the easiest place to do this work. But I say all the time, we have some awesome work happening all around the Commonwealth around fairness ordinances. So up until recently, it was completely legal to fire a person based on their sexual orientation or their gender identity. We had a Supreme Court case a couple of years ago that remedied that for us, but it is still the case that it's completely and absolutely legal to refuse accommodation or housing in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. So Kentucky cities and municipalities are able to pass fairness ordinances, and that's what we see here. Certainly over the last 2 years, we've seen a run of fairness ordinances across northern Kentucky and other parts of Kentucky as well. And this is really important because policy doesn't do everything, but it gives us some ground to stand on. So when there are issues in the community, when there are incidents of bias or transphobia or homophobia, and it happens in every community, there's a place where people can go to report this. They can get additional support. We're seeing conversion therapy bans spread across Kentucky as well. We now have 3, and a couple of other cities I know of that are working on banning conversion therapy in their cities. And again, conversion therapy can look a whole lot of different ways for whether you're lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender. And it seems like a practice that is not happening, or we wouldn't think that it would be happening in our communities, but conversion therapy is alive and well. And I have served students every single year who have experienced conversion therapy. So we have a lot of work to do in Kentucky, and especially in this particular session. And I just wanted to share these 3 pieces of legislation with you. And I have additional resources that I will forward along for you via email. So just yesterday, go ahead, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. We're not seeing the slide that you're on. I think you're still on. I think you're showing us your PowerPoint window and not the slideshow.
Oh, okay.
So yeah.
One second. Did you all see any of that?
No, now we see. I was trying to wait. I was playing hopscotch trying to jump in. I didn't want to interrupt you. So
no, interrupt me.
Okay, now we're up to date with you.
Okay, so do you see slides now?
We do. We're now seeing the legislation, but we were previously on the first slide. So we missed your outcomes and introductions. I mean, we heard it, but we didn't see those slides.
Okay. So do you see the Kentucky policy?
Now we do, yes.
Awesome. So it must have, I think what happened was when I launched the slide deck. So as long as you all can see LGBTQ Kentucky and policy and you're okay with this, I'll just keep moving.
Mhm.
So do you see this Senate Bill 138, Teaching American Principles Act?
We do. Thank you.
Great. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. These are all currently rolling through the session in Frankfurt, and all three pieces of this legislation have a lot of oomph behind them. They're moving. So the resources that I'll send include some talking points on this and some help if you'd like to get involved and support our trans students around action regarding these pieces of legislation. So currently Senate Bill 138 is they're calling it the Teaching American Principles Act. And this is essentially censoring discussions between teachers and students, censoring discussions specifically around sexual orientation, around gender identity, and around race. So attempting to create a curriculum that would leave those conversations out of the classroom. Another piece of legislation that we really see moving very quickly is House Bill 23 and Senate Bill 83. And these, I say, essentially prohibits transgender girls and women from participating in girls' sports. I say essentially because we already have some of the strongest legislation in place around this in Kentucky. And in Kentucky, in order for a trans girl or woman to participate in girls' sports, they're required to go through gender confirmation surgeries, which is just simply not happening for people under the age of 18. So it's an additional sort of a way for our legislators to remind trans kids once again that they don't have the opportunity to participate in sports or extracurriculars as their peers do. And then another piece of legislation that is moving very quickly is House Bill 253 and Senate Bill 84, which they're calling Kentucky's Children Deserve Help, No Harm Act. And this would withhold vital gender affirming care and treatment. So essentially, we've just seen this happen in Texas as well, prohibiting parents from and physicians from getting this really important gender affirming care and treatment to their youth, in which case we're talking specifically about things like puberty blockers, so preventing that sort of life-saving gender affirming care. And I share all of this because this is the weight that our students are carrying on their shoulders, that they are constantly being attacked, their orientations and especially their identities, bathroom legislation every single session. And so it really falls on us as educators to provide this space within our colleges and universities and K-12 schools to make sure that our LGBTQA plus students belong. So a couple of more, and I'll just cover this very, very quickly, and we'll certainly share all of these slides with you, are generally the experiences of Kentucky's LGBTQA plus students. So this is from GLSEN. GLSEN is one of my favorite resources. It is K-12 based. It's an advocacy group that works within K-12 schools. But the resources are plenty and they are free and accessible on the GLSEN website. Everything from trainings to this information here. So every 2 years or so, GLSEN does a national climate survey, and they present that data nationally, but also they break it down by the state level. And so the GLSEN 2019 National Climate Survey demonstrated that Kentucky schools were not safe for most LGBTQA plus students, that the vast majority of LGBTQA plus students were hearing anti-LGBTQ remarks in school, including from school staff, homophobic and transphobic or negative remarks about somebody's gender expression. Furthermore, we're seeing that LGBTQ students in Kentucky are being disciplined for public displays of affection in ways that do not result in similar action for non-LGBTQ students. A lot of discrimination and bias around bathrooms. So many LGBTQ students, transgender students, are unable to use the restroom or the bathroom that aligns with their gender in schools. that we are seeing in our K-12 schools. Trans students are prevented from using their chosen name or their pronouns. I'm working with a couple of school districts in Northern Kentucky right now who are really struggling with this. So it is widespread across Kentucky. Even in the cities where we have fairness ordinances and we think are really progressive, we're still seeing these struggles in our schools. We're seeing students are being prevented from wearing their clothes. They're obviously being prevented or discouraged from playing school sports, and are in some cases being disciplined at school for identifying as part of the LGBTQ community. So these are the experiences, and these are the experiences that I've heard over the years from students when they walk into previously Northern Kentucky University, but I'm hearing it from my colleagues at the University of Kentucky and the University of Louisville as well, that are the experiences of our students coming into higher ed now, particularly after the last 2 years where LGBTQ students suffered disproportionately. We have a lot of work to do to support the students. So I'm looking forward to having this discussion with you around the work that's happening there at Bluegrass Community and Technical College, and think about how we can all work together to create this inclusive space for our students. So I'll pause for a second if anybody has any questions. Are we good? Okay, I can't see your faces, so
Yeah.
just stop me if
raise
you.
your hand, or and we will kind of pause if you need to. Okay, I see Vanessa has a question.
Perfect.
So when you were talking about the legislation regarding care for transgender children,
Yeah.
I know in Tennessee, the gender clinic at Vanderbilt said that when Tennessee passed their law, it didn't impact them at all because they specified that it only applied to prepubescent children. Is the same terminology in the legislation for Kentucky?
The legislation in Kentucky, and I have pulled up the bill. I have not read every bit of the bill, but what I did see, it very specifically says that that trans girls, essentially that they cannot participate in sports on girls' teams. So the language in that House Bill 23, and I'm happy to share House Bill 23 as well. I have it saved on my computer right now. The language specifically says that that all students must, if they're going to participate in sports, must participate on a team that aligns with their biological gender or sex, or the sex that they were assigned at birth. And so the only way that a transgender girl could participate on a girls' sports team is if they had these gender confirmation surgeries. And the legislation, it actually lays this out in writing. So I would assume that they're similar in the way that, and also in Florida and Texas, how elected officials are talking about it. But it does specifically say in that bill, HB 23, that it will prohibit trans girls specifically from participating in girls' sports unless they have that surgery, which they can't have under the age of 18 anyway.
I'm sorry, I was speaking about the House Bill 253 as far as getting gender affirming care. In Tennessee, they put in there that no one prior to puberty can get care, which then Vanderbilt said, no, we don't do any gender affirming care before puberty. So I was wondering if House Bill 253 had that same wording in it.
And I haven't read every piece of it, but I can say that what I understand about House Bill 253 is that it would intervene with that. So we do see puberty blockers are around the age of 8 or 9. So it would in some ways prohibit that, yes. From what I understand, but again, I'm happy to share this bill. Thank you for the question. Other questions? All right, let me just move forward really quickly. I'm not going to go through all of this. We know that sexual orientation and gender identity are different. Sexual orientation is who we may or may not go to bed with. Gender identity is who we go to bed as. So I include this just so that we're all on the same page. We know gay and lesbian is attraction to the same sex or gender. Bisexual, attraction to 2 or more genders. Pansexual is attraction to individuals regardless of their sex or gender. Excuse me. I include polysexual because I'm hearing it more and more, and I was hearing it at the university, and I'm also hearing it in the community from youth. And polysexual is if bisexual is 2, and pansexual is I'm attracted to a person regardless of their sex or gender. A polysexual person is attracted to multiple genders or sex, but not all genders or sex. So accommodating for the fact that we know that there are many, many, many genders and ways to identify. Queer is an umbrella term. It simply means, not normative. The queer identity means something different to every person. I think that you would ask who identifies as queer may give you an answer that's just a little bit different. I identify as queer. You'll see queer used as a sexual orientation or as a gender identity. An asexual person does not experience sexual attraction. Generally, these are all very broad statements. Demisexual is attraction after an emotional bond is formed, and gray sexual is an individual who would rarely experience attraction to any sex or gender. So sexual orientation and gender identity are obviously separate. And I'll pull up our little gender unicorn here. You may have seen this before. So the gender unicorn illustrates the differences then between sexual orientation and gender identity. So we have gender identity here. It's how we identify. You'll hear sex assigned at birth. So when a person is born, the first thing that happens is the doctor holds us up and says, it's a girl or it's a boy. So when we're talking about transgender folks, all that means is I do not identify with the sex that I was assigned at birth. So gender identity, how I identify, sex assigned at birth, and then gender expression is simply the way that we walk around and express our gender or our presentation through our clothing, through our hair, through our style. It's how we express ourselves to the world. Different than sexual attraction, different than emotional attraction, and some of the trans identities, and again, this is not completely exhaustive. There are many, 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 but these are some of the ones that we hear the most here in Kentucky and certainly in schools. And so a trans person, as I said, simply does not identify with the sex that they were assigned at birth. I am a cisgender person, and that means that I do identify with the sex that I was assigned at birth. There was never a question in me or for me about whether or not I was female or a woman or feminine. Those are identities that I have associated with since birth. So other identities that you'll hear used quite frequently are bigender. And a bigender person is somebody whose identity encompasses 2 genders. A gender fluid simply means that the identity is not fixed, and it can flow and shift. Gender queer is simply a non-normative identity that by definition includes neither, both, or a combination of the way that we would think about sex or gender. So it could include a combination of male or female or neither or a combination of. A person who is agender, their gender identity does not have a particular gender. And then finally, a non-binary, and this is, I think you hear this the most, non-binary, I'm sorry, a non-binary person, that is the wrong definition, I apologize. Non-binary simply means that I don't identify within these very binary sorts of ways. I am not male, I am not female, I am non-binary. Do we have any questions about what I just covered? Awesome. So I will just move forward then and start talking. Let's talk about allyship and how we can best support our trans students. So number one is respect. Respect their names, respect their pronouns, and the Trans Student Educational Resources site, it is transstudent.org, is another one of my very, very favorite resources because it provides plenty of free pamphlets and trainings and resources on everything that you can imagine, from gender pronouns to other more specific ways of supporting students, name change procedures. And what's really interesting about the Trans Student Educational Resource site is this is youth led. So it is the only organization nationally that is producing these sorts of resources led by trans youth. So the resources are fantastic. Regarding pronouns, it's so important that we normalize pronouns, even in introductions, certainly in the classroom, but even if you're meeting with a student group, to include pronouns as part of just the practice of what you do. I'm an ex-English teacher, and I often, at the beginning when people started using they, them pronouns, it felt a little bit clunky, but we use they, them pronouns all the time in situations where we may not know a person's gender. Where did they go? Well, they ran to the store. So normalizing they, them pronouns, normalizing the process of allowing people the opportunity to introduce themselves. Hi, my name's Bonnie. I use she, her pronouns, and then you move right on to the next thing. Just that practice of normalizing pronouns, I can tell you, I've heard over the years all the time from students that it meant so much. So when we have our students come into orientation and our orientation leaders are doing introductions, and they were given the opportunity to share their pronouns, that always got back to us in the office, that was an indication that we're thinking, that we're aware that not everybody may use the pronouns that we think that they would use. And we provide that opportunity for them to share that about themselves. And students report all the time that this really means a lot to them. So normalizing the pronouns, normalizing the asking of the names, and then ensuring that the people that we have in those spaces adhere to those pronouns and names, because there are always, the couple of folks out there that just don't want to comply with this. So our job as an ally, and certainly as an accomplice, is to call that out and ensure that our students' pronouns are being respected. I wanted to talk just very, very quickly about the impact of language. And then I have some slides that are very specific about, well, what does this look like in terms of best practices for supporting trans students? So regarding microaggressions, we all know microaggressions are brief and commonplace behavioral or environmental slights toward people of marginalized groups. We know that people are often unaware that they may be engaging in a microaggression. We know that microaggressions cut across all social identities. So I'm talking about trans students, but we know, based on race and ethnicity and sexual orientation and socioeconomic class and family status, that there's and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, plenty of microaggressions. And though it may not be intended to use harmful language, that intention does not equal impact. And we know that particularly trans students, when they experience microaggressions in the classroom, that causes a lot of damage and emotional distress to a student who is simply trying to be their authentic self and learn in an inclusive environment. So some examples of microaggressions that we see against trans students in the classroom specifically are not asking or refusing to use correct names. I've seen this even from faculty, not asking for the opportunity or providing the opportunity for students to share their name, but then refusing to use their correct name in class, not asking or refusing to use correct pronouns. Plenty of examples of faculty and students who would refuse to use the correct pronouns. Another example of a microaggression could be individually, if we overhear offensive comments and we don't intervene, then we can be participating in this act against students. All the time I would hear from students inappropriate questions that people felt very entitled to ask them that we would not ask another person. So asking trans students or faculty or staff specifically about what their real name is, you would be surprised at the questions people ask specifically about genitals or surgeries or or how they have sex, students would report these situations back to me. And then finally, another example is just refusing to allow the use of non-gendered pronouns in academic work without addressing reasons why. So not only respecting the pronouns, but also not allowing our students to use like they or Z in academic work without addressing these reasons. So when we're thinking about allyship for our trans students, then first, I say be patient. It is quite common for trans students through the process of coming out to play around with a couple of different names or play around with what gender identity actually feels right and fits them. So coming out is a process, and it can take years, and we come out over and over and over and over and over again. And it's so different for trans folks through this process. So just be patient with them. Most importantly, maintain confidentiality. Never out anyone, particularly trans folks. It is not safe to be a trans person in our society. We have seen through the last many years, every single year, the acts of violence toward trans people, particularly transgender people of color, and especially transgender women of color. Every year the numbers go up. And so maintaining that confidentiality is so important. Again, knowing and respecting names, knowing and respecting pronouns, understanding that the coming out process for trans people is so different than it is to come out as a lesbian or gay or bisexual. There was a campaign some years ago called I'll Go With You, which was a restroom campaign when we saw a flood of anti-trans legislation around bathrooms across the country. I'll Go With You is a campaign that simply, like, I will go with you to the restroom. So if a trans student was afraid about using a specific restroom, and there's so much anxiety around facilities and restrooms and what restrooms are safe and not safe, saying I will go with you to the restroom so that they feel more secure. And it's something that we certainly practiced in my work some years ago on campus. Knowing your resources, there are so many in Lexington. I'm jealous. I wish we had some of these resources here in Northern Kentucky. And then just continuing to educate yourself and know what's offensive and what's not. And I think some of these resources that I'm sharing with you are good places to start with that. So do we have any questions before I move on to what best practices are and how they look?
So Bonnie, we had two questions in the
Awesome.
chat, and I wanted to address those. So Milton, okay. Did you want to ask your question, or is he on still?
Yeah. So I can ask him. Hello, Dr. Bonnie. So back to the slide previously about the different gender identities. Can you just clarify for me, like if the use of agender and non-binary can be interchangeable, or is there like a key difference in the use?
If agender and non-binary?
Yes.
Yeah, so, and again, non-binary is not an attraction after an emotional bond is formed. I'm sorry, I don't know how I missed that. Non-binary simply means that I don't identify with either one of these genders. But it doesn't mean that I don't, identify with, that there's not some aspect of gender that I don't identify with. Whereas an agender person says, I do not have a particular gender. But the other thing that I will say is sometimes they will, kind of blend together. I will have had plenty of students that have identified as genderqueer, but then in another, breath will say that they're non-binary. So always it's appropriate to ask the person what that gender means to them. And usually, people are very willing to share that. Because it means, identity means something obviously different for everyone. So I don't want to say no again, because I'm not a trans person. But I'm just, sharing what I've learned over the years from supporting these students.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And our second question comes from Brian Howard from Elizabethtown. Brian, you there? Not for sure. Brian, are you there? If not, I can ask the question for you. It says, what would you tell someone who claims that it is not proper English to use they, them for a singular person?
Well, I'll pull out my English degree and say that, Webster's dictionary now says that it is as well. So we have been using they, them for years as a singular orientation or identity. We refer to people as they when we don't know, who they are. I mean, we use they all the time to refer to a singular person. So I know that when 10 years ago or so, when this really, I think there was more widespread awareness started. When I started at Northern 8.5 years ago, we didn't have a non-discrimination policy that included gender identity or gender expression. Like that was just 8.5 years ago. So there, I think when we first get going on the work, when we first start normalizing this into who we are and how we're operating, it can feel a little bit clunky. And it just takes a little bit of practice. I understand at first I thought, okay, that's not right. But then you think about it, and we already use they, them as singulars, but
And there were some
that's my answer.
There were some great responses as well in the chat as
Awesome.
well. And Brian said thank you for all the responses. All right, that was all the questions. Is there anyone else who has a question at this time while we have a small break? And all right, if not, just continue to put them in the chat. Okay, Dr. Myers.
Perfect. Okay, so the next part here, I just want to talk through what these what best practices look like for supporting trans students at an institution. So if you are really beginning this work and you want to think about how do we build a campus that is proactively and intentionally creating a space where LGBTQA plus students can thrive, but particularly trans students, pulling from a couple of different resources, including the Campus Pride Index, is a really good way to start leading you down that path. What I like about the Campus Pride Index is it gave us a starting point. So again, when I started at NKU in 2013, we were the second office that had been founded on a university campus at that point. There was really nothing in place in terms of non-discrimination policies, in terms of facilities. We weren't thinking about things like restrooms. There was no name change process in place. There was no way for students to designate pronouns. Like there was nothing. So we were starting from the beginning. These assessments do what they do, and they're good for what they're good for. And certainly we can criticize them quite a bit as well. But as far as a starting point, it's a really good baseline for looking at what you already have in place and then thinking about where improvements need to be made. So the first part of that, the first way to begin thinking about that work is by just looking at your policy. So what is the policy inclusion for trans students at Bluegrass Community and Technical College? So you look at things like the non-discrimination statement or that sort of written commitment is inclusive of gender identity and gender expression. This is things like mission statements as well. And so this could be policy, obviously at the institutional level, but also at the department level. So just thinking about how you are including, inclusive language, and that you're being intentionally inclusive of gender identity, gender expression, and obviously sexual orientation as well, and those sorts of statements. That we begin thinking about what partnerships. So again, I talk about approaching this work as a curriculum project and how we can actually change every single bit of our interaction with an institution to make sure that we're doing our part to be inclusive. And that includes thinking about the people that we do business with. So outside vendors, food service vendors, even entertainment contracts, that we are moving toward the point where if we're going to contract with a vendor, that we expect that vendor's mission and priorities to align with ours. So not doing business, say, with an anti-LGBTQ organization or with an organization that might not be outwardly anti-LGBTQ or against trans students, but but in their policies and their practices, they're not supportive of LGBTQ people. So just thinking about those partnerships, thinking about benefits. These are benefits from health benefits to retirement benefits, any benefit that is offered to an opposite sex couple would be offered to a same sex couple or to a trans couple as well. So thinking about all of those different benefits, like campus recreation site can be another area. Do we, if we offer, say, free membership for faculty or for staff, like what do we offer for spouses and families? So that's where it's getting at. If we're offering benefits, then we need to be equitable where we're offering those benefits across the board. It looks at representation. So everything from grievance procedures to admissions applications to forms that you are using within the institution in any kind of form, like healthcare form, counseling form, like generally just any form that you would have somebody fill out, that we're being inclusive with our language and that there's representation, LGBTQ representation in those alumni materials and publications. Are we including representation of LGBTQ folks? That we're providing opportunities for people to self-identify their sexual orientation or gender identity. And some examples of that would be, again, like an admissions application or post-enrollment forms. Certainly that we have a name change process in place. And we are restricted in Kentucky by some of the things that we're able to do, but we can absolutely have a name change process in place where students who want to use a name that is not their legal name are able to make that change and do so. So beyond being able to change your name, that we would allow them to change their name on their student ID, that we would allow them to change their name on their course rosters and Canvas, Blackboard, and the directory that we use. And then academic honors. I include academic honors because the number of times that we would process a name change, but it wouldn't translate to the college level or to the program level. So students were being dead named in those honors. So making sure that we're doing what we can to honor a student's name, their chosen name. And then along with that we're providing opportunities for students to identify pronouns and gender designation on all of those places as well. So it's really looking at the policies, the overarching policies of the institution. And I have a couple more and then I'll stop and we'll chat. Regarding institutional support and commitment, what that looks like, best practices for supporting trans students. You look at staff support. So if you get to the point where you're able to have even a part-time person or a person who splits their time and is able to give time to at least 50% of their time to support LGBTQA+ students, is one of the biggest things that they're looking at the, nationally in terms of institutional support and commitment, that we're putting our money, where our mouth is and making sure that we have this full-time or part-time staff member, that we have a designated space, whatever that looks like, that we have ongoing training opportunities. So things like safe zones or allied trainings around trans students, that we have networks and things like employee resource groups who are visible, groups on campus who advocate, but also who openly identify as allies and advocates. Looking at employment practices and making sure that we're creating an inclusive environment where we want LGBTQ people to come and work for us. And we're including that in the way that we recruit staff or faculty or students. Advisory committee. So even if we're not able to have a full or a part-time person doing this work, that we have an advisory committee that is offering programs and services and reviewing the institutional support and commitment of the institution and coming up with suggestions for how to improve these services. This is how the work started in every campus that I've worked with, and certainly at the University of Kentucky. They had a really strong advisory committee when they were trying to get to the point where they could found their center on campus. administration and the support of your administrators. So ensuring that you have senior administrators who are visibly and publicly supportive of this work. I can tell you I have a great ally in Dr. Yates. He was an incredible support to me during our time on NKU together, and certainly to the LGBTQ students. So you're in good shape there. Representation, and again, just thinking about representation from leadership opportunities for students, for faculty and staff. Do we have LGBTQ representation in leadership, in departments, in alumni opportunities? And then obviously thinking about our facilities, restrooms and locker rooms, and how we're ensuring that trans students in particular have those spaces. Campus Pride asks if at least 50% of the facilities on campus, the academic buildings on campus, have restrooms that are gender inclusive, and that's one of those efforts that you can achieve, but it takes a minute to start working toward that. So just beginning to think about facilities, bathrooms and restrooms and locker rooms. They will think about what academic and student life opportunities there are. So academic life is obviously the academic offerings. So things like, women and gender studies courses, but I think even more importantly is that when we're teaching, that we're incorporating LGBTQ issues into the courses that we already have, that we have administrators who are addressing heteronormativity and gender normativity. You have administrators that aren't afraid to talk about LGBTQ inclusion and supporting trans students and what that looks like. That you have the number of resources in the library, from journals to magazines to obviously books, that we're thinking about our new hire and our faculty trainings and our onboarding, and ensuring that we're covering these issues, particularly around how to support trans students, names, pronouns, et cetera. Thinking about the professional associations, so STEM groups, law groups, any professional association or even community association that you can bring in to better connect students to those resources within their fields. And again, faculty and staff organizations or employee resource groups. Regarding student life, we're simply looking at, are there regular activities and events that increase awareness and visibility? Are there social opportunities? Do we have LGBTQ representation in student organization like leadership? Do we have LGBTQ student organizations? Is there funding for leadership opportunities? This is an incredible leadership opportunity, this conference that you all are hosting today. So things like this, and then also thinking through when we're preparing students to go into the workforce, and through things like career services, are we ensuring that we're inclusive of those LGBTQ identities? So I have a couple of other slides here. And again, I'll share this with you regarding campus safety and mental health support, recruitment and retention. And then lastly, I wanted to share with you all, if you have not connected with the Lexington Pride Center, the website is listed here, lexpridecenter.org. If you go to their resource tab, they have everything you can imagine. So Bluegrass Black Pride, Kentucky Black Pride, the Trans Health Advocacy Program, Trans Kentucky, Queer Kentucky, they link you to all of those different organizations and partnerships. So the Lexington Pride Center is a huge resource for the work, and certainly a great place to be able to refer students. So I will stop sharing and be mindful of the fact that we have 5 minutes left, and any questions that you may have.
I'll say, Dr. Meyer, this has been great information that you're sharing. As an ally and a chief diversity officer, I love what you're talking about and sharing, and I think it's so important. A lot of, majority of the individuals on the call, if not all, are faculty members. And so being someone who worked in student affairs and also in the classroom, and you have a degree in curriculum and stuff, what are some recommendations or suggestions you have for faculty members who may not know the work or who have not submerged into the readings and understanding, so that students feel comfortable and safe in those spaces?
Definitely. I think the first thing we have to do is give ourselves some grace. there's a lot of anxiety around, I want to be an ally and I want to be an advocate, but I'm worried that I'm going to say or do the wrong thing. So understanding that everybody messes up at some point. I mess up at some point. So if you accidentally misgender a student, if you accidentally use the wrong name, just apologize and move on and do better. Students will tell you that they are always looking for that symbol that shows that you are an inclusive, that you care about your LGBTQ students. So things like putting your pronouns on like your Zoom screen, or including your pronouns in your email signature, shows students when you email them, okay, this is a person who's thinking about this and who cares about me. And so you don't have to be perfect, but you're showing your students that you're supportive, just by those very simple little actions. Absolutely, ensuring that students know that they can use their chosen name in class, offering in those initial introductions, all of the getting to know you things that we do at the beginning of the semester, that we offer the opportunity for students to share their pronouns, and normalizing the use of shared pronouns. And then just thinking about how you can illustrate this within your own classes. One example of, many examples over the years, but I had a student who went to an all boys Catholic high school in Louisville, and he was in a math class where his math teacher was talking about whatever they were talking about, but essentially said, someday when you grow up and marry a woman, or if you marry a man, that's okay too, and just moved on. And the student talked about that the 4 years that I worked with him on campus, and what an impact that made, that there was, in that situation, that there was an instructor, a teacher in this case, who was willing to just recognize the fact that not everybody in the class may identify as heterosexual, or as cisgender. So just providing those sorts of opportunities goes a really far way. If little, pride flag or ally, anything, we're always looking for the rainbow. So if you have even like a little ally sticker or rainbow flag or anything that you keep in your office, or even the way that we use our backgrounds, on Zoom screens, are ways that you can show initially that you're a supportive person, and then just continuing to take advantage of the educational opportunities. Awesome. Yes. Yeah.
Jenny, that's a great question. Do you want to ask that? So Jenny put a question in chat, and I want to give her opportunity.
Sure. This has been such amazing information and really good stuff. And I also feel like we've all just been preaching to the choir during this whole conference. So what do we do when we have other faculty members who maybe are not as willing to be open-minded, or who are resistant to allyship? And I guess really what I want to know is, if I had my way, we would require trainings such as safe zone trainings. Everybody would be required to attend those, just like we're required to do diversity stuff. But I've also seen that backfire a little bit with diversity, with students. I'm not privileged, So how do we convince those people that need a little convincing? Do we just have to wait them out and hope they retire?
I think it's just the openness for the discussion. When I started, I had an office and a telephone. I had no computer. There was like literally, it was just tiny little space, and it was about just being really patient. So I used programming to drive policy change. I used programming to create representation where representation seemingly didn't exist. So like by bringing in speakers, throwing drag shows in the middle of campus. I mean, it's all about visibility, 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 visibility. When people begin to realize the number of LGBTQ people within a space, and as this work continues, and more faculty and staff and students see BCTCS as a really inclusive spot, your numbers, they're going to come out, and that's going to help tremendously. But I had people who would come in my office and sit down and say, I'm going to tell you right now, I'm a bigot, like actually said this, and I don't understand why an office like yours is here. And so in those sorts of situations, I could fly off the handle and tell that person what I think, or I can try to engage in a conversation. We're never going to drag this person all the way along, you know, over here with me marching in the Pride Festival, but we might be able to get them to the point where they understand that these identities and orientations are valid. And if you're an educator, then you need to get on board with supporting all of your students. We have to check those biases at the door, but exactly what you're doing here. I mean, this conference and providing these spaces and opportunities, it really begins to do the work and make that change to shift that culture within the institution. It just takes time.
And I feel I should have mentioned this as well. So we have faculty from all across the state of the 16 community technical colleges that are on here. Dr. Feeney, who is our provost, he had his hand raised, and I think he had said he had something to add to that.
I was just going to say, from at least a BCTC standpoint, is that, you know, like you, Bonnie, I've experienced where someone has come up to me after a presentation and said, I just need to let you know I don't agree with what you said in relation to this or whatever the issue is. One of my standard lines with that is, you know, you have the right to believe whatever you want. Here at work, I'm going to hold you accountable to serving all of our students with respect and honoring who they are. And so for any of our students that are on here, if you experience a staff or faculty member that is being disrespectful, you need to let us know. Let me know, let Dr. Yates know, and we'll have that discussion with them to help them in a formative way become a better staff member, a better faculty member to serve all of our students. But it's really important that we get that feedback.
I have Dr. Yates that I'll send your way. I mentioned Lexington-based resources, but there are resources in the southern rural parts of Kentucky as well. And so I'm going to get a list to you so that you could share out for folks. And totally, absolutely happy, as Dr. Yates knows, to help with if anything as you're developing trainings on your campuses or workshops or just anything I can do to support this work. I'm here to do it.
And I will say, please speak with your chief. Your diversity officers at your campus. I did share Dr. Meyer's contact information with the peer team as someone who can come in and possibly do some allied training and things for your campuses. And so if you wish to move forward with some of that, maybe talk to whoever's on your diversity peer team, because they do have the contact information. Or if you go back up to the slide, her email is there as well. Well, is there any more questions? Because if not, we don't want to miss our closing remarks from Dr. Acoppo, the president for BCTC. But Dr. Meyer, thank you so much for sharing all of your wisdom and your knowledge and your advocacy for this work, and appreciate you joining us. And as always, it's great to see you.
Great to see you as well, y'all. I look forward to seeing you all in person as soon as I can get down there.
All right. Take care. Good luck with your run too. Be careful.
Thank you. Have a great rest of the day, everybody. Thank you.